Hi, welcome to 320 Workshops. Today's project is an antique bed. This bed was built probably, we estimate, mid-1800s. It belonged to my parents. They had it for most of their married life, and it's got a lot of sentimental value. So my son wants to use it in his bedroom, but the problem is a couple-fold. One, it's not wide enough. It's only 53 inches wide, which is the width of a full-size mattress. So therefore, the railings need to be out farther than that. So we're going to address that. The other part is this has a footboard that's very similar to this. He doesn't want the footboard. He just wants it to be plain at the end. So we're going to address that, make some new legs, put some new railings on it, and sturdy it up. So we'll see how it goes. So now that we had the bed up on the bench, we can show you, here's where the old railings fitted into the headboard. There was a mortise joint originally, and it's pegged in from the side, but over the years that wore and got loose. It was attempted to be repaired a couple times with angle brackets. So this is pretty beat up. It's not really where we want it to be. And like I said before, it doesn't fit. So what we're going to do, again, not the greatest way of doing it, but the only real option we have at this point would be to put kind of an outrigger on the side of this. We'll bolt this in place, and then we'll put our connections out here for the railings, and so that will hold a full-size mattress. So this walnut is called rustic walnut, which means it's got lots of knots and figured grain, etc. So it looks really nice, and we really want to use it. It's also a little bit cheaper than clear walnut. So what we're going to do here is a couple little places we're going to fill in with some just colored CA glue. I'm just sanding that down.
Started off by gluing up some thick blanks for the legs of the footboard. I scraped off the excess glue and ran them over the jointer to make sure that they were square. I wanted to replicate the legs of the headboard, so I measured the details to mark off the blank on the lathe. I measured the distance between the high and low points from the bottom. And then I measured the diameters of these same points. There's a square section of the leg, so I wanted to create a clean transition and remove some of the corners to make the turning go a little faster. Here you can see my sawtill. I got the concept from Rob Cosman, but I put the stops on the inside of the till so that it would have a good clean front. Then I cut back the corners 3/8 of an inch. I used some scraps to put together a cradle to hold the blank at 45 degrees. You can see I put the two boards together at 90 degrees and then mounted it to a 45-degree cut. While simple, it worked great. I placed the cradle against the fence with the blade lined up with the cut line. Now I need to mark the center of the blank. I prefer this type of center finder with concentric circles, but marking diagonals or other types of center finders work just fine. Then drill a small pilot hole and tap the drive spur with a wooden-faced mallet. Now off to the lathe. Once I get the blank mounted between the centers, I begin with the top knob of the leg. This feature is not replicated from the headboard, but with the bottom foot of the bed not being a true footboard, it couldn't be much, and I didn't like the look of just a square leg at the top. I used a small block plane to ease back the corners to hopefully reduce the chipping, but I still ended up with a big gouge. I glued it back in place, but it put it on the inside of the corner and ended up cutting off that corner off some anyway, so it didn't really make any difference. Now I'll start with the bottom of the leg, first get it round, and then using the measurements I took off the original legs, I begin to turn the pattern. I use calipers to measure the diameter at each mark. Turning the pattern then becomes a matter of connecting just the high points to the low points. Like most woodworkers, I forget how much I enjoy turning and wish I did more of it. A bit of sanding And we're just about done here. Round off just a little bit more, then off to the bench. Now that the legs are turned, I take the legs to the bench to work a little bit more on the transitions and give it some more sanding. Now I have two finished legs for the footboard. It used to intimidate me to turn legs because I was always worried that they wouldn't match, but it was pointed out to me that it won't be side by side, so no one will see the minute differences at a distance. But subconsciously they will see those minor differences, and it actually adds to the beauty of the piece. Next, I need to mark the location of the cross boards onto the legs. I want the boards and the side rails to be 10 inches off the floor. He has some storage box he wants to keep under his bed, and this will leave enough room for them to slide under. I also need to mark the offset from the inside corner of the leg to the inside edge of the board. Now that I have the location of the boards laid out, I will mark the location of the dominoes and then cut the mortises. It was a little tricky lining up the mortises on the leg since I don't have a great reference point and not much width to work with. So the triangle piece of plywood is just a piece of scrap that I drew a storyboard on and used it to locate both the edge of the board and the center of the mortise. I used the same storyboard for the outriggers on the headboard, and it worked really well.
My little cradle to cut back here and eliminate some space when I'm turning that. Now what I want to do is I'm going to cut this corner off where the mattress is going to lie. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this with a handsaw and pare this back with a chisel just to kind of neaten it up a little bit. Let's go over to the bench and do that. I'm going to turn that this way, a little better angle for me. Now, just kind of come here and knock this corner back. Now I'll clean that up. Now get this all sanded down and ready to be assembled.
Now using 120 grit and 150 grit with the orbital sander on the flat sides, and then use some hand sanding on the detailed areas in these same grits as we can get this prepared for assembly. I'm using Titebond's dark glue here. I like that on walnut, and I'm putting glue on the tenons and the joint. Then it's just put the pieces together and repeat on the other leg and then get them clamped up. Here I'm putting on one clamp at the bottom and one clamp on the top to even out the pressure. Now I'm going to clean up some of the glue squeeze out. I know a lot of people say you shouldn't do this with water, but I like to use a stiff brush or an old toothbrush and some water to get into the corners like this. I've done this without issue for many years. I also use the method of letting the glue dry a bit and then scraping it off in some circumstances. Since the goal is to widen the bed, I will be attaching outriggers to the headboard, but like most other older pieces, the legs aren't square, so I need to get the pieces parallel to the overall headboard so that they meet the footboard correctly. I will start by using a square and a plane to measure the high spots and plane those off until I have a flat and square surface to the side of the leg. Here's a trick I like to use. I get the headboard level with the table so that I had a reference surface. And then I got the outside of the square to the table, and then the front of the outrigger could be square to the headboard. I'm going to use the same storyboard on this end of the side rails that I used at the foot of the bed, so it's just a matter of repeating the process here. I'm going to use the Festool domino connectors. Using this jig that came with the system, I drill a hole into the mortise. I'll show a little bit more of this later. Now I need to get a little bit more sanding done, again using grits 120 and 150. On the tops and bottom of the rails, I created a slight roundover. I don't want to flatten this, so I'm going to use this intermediate pad to prevent those from creating a flat spot. Now to add a bit of color. I wiped everything down with a tack cloth to get rid of any dust, and I'm using a dark walnut stain that I'll brush on, let it set, and then wipe it off. One technique I like to use is to not apply the stain to the end grain with the brush, since it will darken much faster. So I wait until wiping the stain off and use the saturated rag to rub the stain into the ends. I have better control over the color this way. So I'll begin to put the finish on. I'm going to use an amber shellac. First I cleaned the headboard to get any wax, polish, and dirt from the surface before this step. I will also apply the shellac to the new pieces in the same manner as I am here. After that, I'll put 2 coats of General Finishes Armor Seal with a rag in to give it a strong finish. Now let me show you how the Festool connectors work. In one side there's a connector with a stub. As you tighten down the stub, the tenon tightens within the mortise. On the rail side, there is a connector with a set screw. That's what the hole is for. And then there's an assembly that holds that square. Then with the 2 dominoes, this is a very strong joint. With the 2 components put together and you tighten the set screw, it pulls them together very tightly. I've built several beds this way and it's held up very well. Now to attach the outriggers to the leg. First, I'll mark the location of the outrigger and the screw locations, then drill a pilot hole, and then a hole for the plug. I mark that so we can drill a pilot hole into the leg itself. Then I'll screw the outriggers onto the side of the leg. Next, I add plugs and cut them flush. I need to add a ledge for the mattress platform to set on. This is pretty straightforward. I used a 2x2 and screwed it to the side rails about every 12 inches. Next, I assemble the bed so that I can get the ledge on the head and the foot of the bed in line with the rail sides. I did have an issue with one of the connectors coming loose, but that was more my error than the system. Once that was fixed, I was able to attach the other 2 ledges. Then I cut the plywood to sit on the ledge and create a platform for the mattress. When this plywood is screwed down, it makes the bed extremely rigid. With this being a full-size bed, I did not add any other supports in the middle of it. But if it had been a queen size bed, I would have probably added an additional leg under the plywood. And here's the final product. The low footboard updates the overall look of the bed, and the outriggers make it usable with a modern mattress. With only a couple of inches added in width, the extensions aren't even noticeable. Unfortunately, the mattress he chose was fairly thick and hid a lot of the headboard. They make a low-profile box spring that would probably have helped with this, but overall, everyone was very happy with the results.